Have you ever wondered where Steve Jobs went to high school? Co-founder and CEO of Apple attended Homestead High School in Cupertino, California. According to a biography on his life, it was at Homestead that Jobs took his first electronics class, sparking his interest in electronics and bringing us all of our iPhones today. In California, less than a quarter of funding for public schools comes from property tax, compared to Texas, where property tax accounts for about 60% of funding. California's biggest source of revenue for schools is state income taxes. If that weren't the case and school districts instead relied on property taxes that wouldn't have brought in as much income, that high school might not have been able to support programs such as electronics, and we may have never heard of Steve Jobs today. That was a very specific example, but the lack of adequate education for children in poverty-poor school districts is unethical due to a deprivation of both scholastic and extracurricular development opportunities. I've done copious amounts of research on this for my informative speech, and even more so in the past couple weeks. I also have multiple family members in the Texas education system who have firsthand experience with school district funding policies. During this presentation, keep in mind your future children that will be going through these schools and what kind of education you want for them. I will bring to your attention the handicap faced by students in economically disadvantaged school districts and the gap of success that it puts in Texas's education system, while using statistics, expert testimony, and a statement from a Texas teacher to persuade my audience of the same conviction. In most schools, extracurricular programs are almost always the first to go in making cuts due to a lack of funding. Whether it be a sport, art, or technology program, students who are involved in these activities are more likely to pursue something that they enjoy in life. Since Texas schools are funded majoritively by property tax, students in poverty-poor districts are likely to suffer from the lack of introduction into areas to express themselves. With better funded school districts, countless more talented artists, musicians, and athletes could come from Texas. In a book titled School-Linked Services, Promoting Equity for Children, Families, and Communities, authors Laura Bronstein and Susan Mason write, if funding is considered the crucial factor, then there is a stronger argument for reassessing state funding formulas to ensure equity and adequacy for public schools, especially those in low-income neighborhoods. Though not all extracurricular programs are connected to school, the vast majority of students who continue to pursue their activity at the collegiate or even professional level began through their middle school and high school programs. In an article on property taxation and equity, authors Calvin Kent and Kent N. comment on how the public demand for lower property taxes has occurred simultaneously with court directives for greater equity and adequacy in school finance. We may wish that we could adequately fund all public schools while not hurting our government's budget nor our own bank accounts, but that isn't possible, so it will require sacrifice on both ends. This topic hits close to home with me because my brother has had the incredible opportunity to play football at an Ivy League university and receive the most distinguished education that will help him greatly in life. In middle school, my parents were considering moving us to a much smaller school with an unrecognized football team due to a lack of funding and support, and had that happened, Adam wouldn't have had the coaches, team, fan base, and exposure that it took to get him where he is now. While I do highly support extracurricular programs, I will say that the scholastic side of school is just as much and even more so necessary to financially provide for. Less funding for necessary classes affects students' ability to reach their maximum potential scholastically, thus possibly affecting their life post-high school. Colleges accept or reject applicants primarily due to their academic performance in high school. In Texas, the richest school district, Highland Park ISD, has a 0% economically disadvantaged student population, as compared to the poorest, Bowles ISD, with 54.8% of students being categorized as economically disadvantaged. Within those schools, only 38.7% at Bowles were deemed college-ready, juxtaposed with Highland Park, where 93.1% of students graduated with adequate grades and skills for college. In an article on the political economy of education finance in Texas, Thomas Husted and Lawrence Kinney write about plaintiffs in a series of education finance equity legal cases, arguing that the education finance system violated the state's education clause, that it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provisions for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. Without sufficient funds for essential classes, there's no chance for students to explore more specific classes, such as aquatic science or anatomy, or be able to choose between human geography or world geography, which are classes that could aid in choosing a career field or even a college major, a luxury that most rich schools but not very many poor schools have. My oldest brother, a high school English teacher in Lubbock, said it best. When asked how he's seen a lack of funding affect the level of education that he is able to provide his students, he stated that it widens the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The rich kids live on this part of town, parents pay more in taxes, better funding for schools, better equipment, computers, facilities, etc. And then the poor kids are left with outdated textbooks, overcrowded classrooms with too few desks, and not enough resources for each kid. He said, Personally, I think I could do my job a bit better if I didn't have 40 plus kids in one classroom. Hiring another teacher would help with that, but there's only so much to go around. All in all, every child deserves equal access to supplementary activities and a quality academic upbringing. Here are a picture. This is Allen High School, their football stadium that they built a couple years ago. It was a $60 million building project. Compared to schools like this with outdated libraries and computer labs. So this is one example of the gap in financial funding in schools, where some can afford $60 million football stadiums and others can't even afford an adequate library. So the lack of adequate education for children in poverty-poor school districts is unethical due to a deprivation of both scholastic and extracurricular development opportunities. I feel suited to speak on this topic due to the weeks of research I put into this speech, forming my opinion as I see facts and real-life effects in our current school district funding policies. Now, with these statistics, expert testimonies, and stories in mind, think about how a different K-12 experience might have affected you and the effect that you want it to have on your children. Though Texas might not be home of the next Steve Jobs, we do have a responsibility to provide every student with equal opportunities educationally, as well as giving them a chance to pursue something that they are passionate about. Thank you.